Hello, beautiful human beings. Welcome back to the Ryan Magic Show. I'm your host, Ryan Magic, and in this episode, we're going to be discussing some heavy topics that require a lot of emotional maturity and an open mind. So the pre-frame is be prepared that we will be discussing some potentially triggering topics. To give slightly more context to that, discussing some of the brutality of life and just pre-framing that. Requesting a review for this podcast. Thank you. Let's get into the episode for today. So, we know through our relationship growing up in the Western world, most likely, that most of us have been exposed to some form of religion. And there is a big topic in religion in the world of right and wrong. The way it's depicted in Christianity and Catholicism is there's heaven and hell. There is God that is benevolent, and then there's the devil that is malevolent and evil. And I'm going to discuss the opportunity of how to interpret and view this in a way that can help assist your life to become more empowered and to give you the opportunity to grow spiritually. And I am developing my relationship to these ideas that I'm sharing and going to be riffing on in this episode. It's something that really challenges my view of the world and view of life. And so one thing that I wrestle with a lot and think about a lot is, why is there so much terror in the world? There's a lot of beauty in the world too, but why is there murder? Why is there torture? Why is our whole animal world and whole even molecular system built off eating each other? It's kind of brutal, right? Why every day for me, I eat meat, and when we were foragers, hunter-gatherers, from 10,000 years ago and before that, for 140 to 200,000 years, Homo sapiens were also in that game, going around, murder an animal, eat it, murder an animal, eat it, rely on that for survival. And then those animals that are being killed rely on other animals for survival, and even animals that are herbivores relying on eating other living beings for sustenance. It's kind of crazy. Not just that, but why does evil exist? Why does the devil exist as a concept? But why are people doing horrendous things like crimes of war? And there is a lot of crazy stuff that happens in this human experience. And if the universe or God created all of this, why would he or she or it create this level of suffering and pain in the extreme examples of the things that terrify me the most? So to be honest, a big fear that I've had throughout my whole life is being tortured. And I've wrestled with contemplation around this, and could I surrender into that experience if it happened? And it sounds pretty hardcore, but it happens to lots of people. There are people in the world right now that are experiencing this. And there's a page on Instagram called Nature is Metal, like heavy metal music that's hardcore. Nature is hardcore. And it's a page just full of videos capturing the brutality of violence between animals. And it's intense. It's real. That's what happens in nature. And we're just kind of sheltered from it in a way. So we kind of exist in this weird place in society at the moment where the inevitable reality of life involves destruction, and we kind of don't see a lot of it. It's happening, but we don't see a lot of it. For example, the meat industry. There's a lot of abuse that happens in the treatment of animals in the world, of which we eat the food, but we don't see that happening. And so then when small things happen, it can throw us as people in the Western world. So just setting that context of this is something that I think about a lot, and I wrestle with it between my humanity, my humanness, and my being, my spiritual perspective. And sometimes it can be really difficult to apply a spiritual lens to human suffering, because it can be a bit, I'm going to say, sociopathic, in the sense of, let's say someone's tortured and you go, yeah, that's just part of the polarity of life. There's good and bad, there's right and wrong, there's positive and negative, and that's just the balance of the universe. It's all love, it's all spirit. That's true, it is. It is all built of all of our reality is the polarity, the positive, the negative, the good, the bad, the angels, the devils, the God and the devil, the angel and the demons, the God and the devil. All this good, bad, right, wrong exists. All this polarity exists, and it is. All the way down to the microscopic atomic structure of positive and negative with proton and electron. There's balance. There's balance in all of it. And there's creation and there's destruction in life constantly. And so what's the value in this situation? What's the value in this situation? Well, the reason I'm doing this episode is because I want to invite in the opportunity to view life through a lens of absolute maturity and wholeness, so that you can experience the greatest level of fulfillment in life and empowerment in life. And this is something that I play with and wrestle with in my own inner world. And so I'm just going to start by saying, anything that we judge, I'm going to start by saying this. Someone who is enlightened doesn't judge anything. Someone who is enlightened doesn't judge anything. Now, a judgment can be positive or negative. And I'm going to give a bunch of examples of what I just said, but to explain it further first, I see the world, as you know, and I'm going to keep repeating it because although it's something that's simple when being explained, it's so difficult to embody it and remember this perspective as we're going through life. And so the more that you hear it, the more it'll be able to soak in, and the more you'll be able to gain empowerment and influence over the quality of your life. We have our head and we have our heart. The head is survival brain. It's the consciousness state and lens to view life from fear. That is the amygdala working in our brain. And in the nervous system, it activates the fight or flight response. Dysregulation, the sympathetic nervous system. It pumps adrenaline and cortisol through our body, and it causes us to behave from a state of pressure, if I summarize it that way. You're in the head, you're experiencing some sense of pressure. When you're in the heart, fulfillment is the objective of that state of consciousness, that aspect that influences our approach and view and experience of life. And instead of pressure, we experience presence in that state. This is the aspect of our brain that's the prefrontal cortex, to oversimplify it. And in our nervous system, that leads to us being in the rest and digest state, a state where we're grounded and regulated. And the heart is also a lot more subtle. And so when we're experiencing things from the heart and we're in that place, we're in a state of unconditional love, true love. We're feeling whole in the heart, whole, perfect and complete in who we are. And we see the world through the lens of love. So everything that we filter through that map, because the heart views things through wholeness, and the head views things from lack or separation / polarity or duality. And so people often think, well, heaven is the place that's positive, and if someone's life is good, it's because they're getting all these positive things and things are going really well for them. That's love. That's God treating them well. If someone's going through a challenge in life, that's the devil. That's bad. Whereas the positive and the negative, from my understanding, both reside in the head. And the way that where it stems from is this. If you imagine an animal in the wild, and we have an animal brain, that's the amygdala, that's that primitive reptilian brain. It's like the most prehistoric part of our brain. And it looks at life through that fear consciousness of survival. And the way that it works in an oversimplistic way, this is just a theoretical model that can help make sense of how our fear brain works, is experience happens. We take in the full experience, what we see in the experience, hear, smell, taste, sense, and everything that we notice in that experience, boom, had this experience. And if the brain deems that was good for our survival, the little memory, just imagine it's kind of like a little video game, pops a little green positive, like a little green bubble, and it's got a plus on it, positive. Awesome, I had this experience. I remember I've got a little snapshot memory of it saved in my amygdala or hippocampus. And now I know, okay, cool. I just had that experience, that's good. And then there's a list of, these are all the things that are good for my survival. Then on the opposite end, every time there's all the senses, the full snapshot of an experience, a moment, a memory happening in our brain that's negative, the brain goes, that's bad. Avoid those things. A little red bubble with a negative sign on it above that memory, that snapshot saved in the brain now. And that goes on the list of all the avoid, and then all the positive things, that big positive list that happens over time with all the memories, attach. We want to attach. We want more of that. That's good for our survival. Avoid these things, attach to these things, avoid these things, attach to these things. And the whole collective sum of these positive, negative, good and bad experiences from the lens of survival create a script or an algorithm that has us react to life in certain ways. So then anything, according to our formula, in our modern day present moment that happens in life, if we're in our head, let's say, for example, someone says something and it triggers one of the negative memories that exist in the mind. That's just, I felt uncomfortable when that person said that when I was 6. And then it happened another 4 times in different but similar flavors. Okay, cool. This is happening right now. That person said something to me. This is bad. I just had this bad thing happen to me today. Now I feel sad and frustrated, and this is bad. Because the brain has said, hey, here's the meaning that you should make of this based on that algorithm. If something happens that's advantageous for our survival, then we'll feel positive emotions and go, yeah, this is good. Now, both the experiences are neutral. And when we're in our heart, we're seeing the benefits and drawbacks. We're seeing the full spectrum of that experience that's happening with us through the eyes of love. And this is what happens when we commit to someone in marriage. We say our vows and we commit to loving someone through the positive and the negative, the ups, the downs, loving them for their strengths and their weaknesses. And it's unconditional. Hey, I'm going to take that full experience. If you were just to say, I'm not going to spend time with you in this marriage when you're in a low mood and you've got these weaknesses. I don't really like them, so I don't love those parts of you, but I'm happy to marry you because of the positives. That wouldn't be unconditional love. And that's not what's being committed to in a marriage. Both sides is what true love is. So when someone's in the consciousness state in their head when someone's in the consciousness state of their heart, they're seeing life as it is, objectively. Some people call this equanimity, equal, positive and negative. Some people call it objectivity. Some people call it love, neutrality. But it can, when it's seen through the lens of the heart, the whole thing can be seen with gratitude and love. Now, if someone is in a moment and they're experiencing something and it triggers either a positive or a negative association to that moment, whether it's positive or negative is both still a judgment. If someone comes to you and says, "You're such a good friend, Brian. You're such a good friend." And then or someone buys me a present and I'm like, "Oh yeah, this is really good. I like this person." I'm judging them positively. But if someone comes and gives me a gift and I go, "Oh, this is really beautiful," and I can see the beauty in it and the gratitude for it, but then also I'm not thinking, "Wow, they're such a good friend." I'm thinking, they are who they are. Sometimes they're more generous. Sometimes they're less generous. Sometimes they spend more quality time and put more effort into our connection. Other times they're busy. They don't become a better friend just because they're going through a time that's a bit more spacious. I actually love them equally through the whole experience. That's unconditional love. That would be viewing the situation through the heart. Now, when a animal is in the wild and they are dominated by their fear brain, their animal brain, because they are an animal. So that's how they view life. They're not let's say a giraffe. They're not a giraffe being like we are a human being. They're just a giraffe. It's not a rhinoceros being and then there's a human being, or there's a fish being and a human being. No, it's just fish. But there's human being. So why are we called human beings? A simple way that we can look into this symbolically is we have the human part, which is our animal, our Homo sapien, and then we have the being part, which is the heart, the part of us that can access this modern brain that has imagination, has the capacity to dream and solve problems and critically think and strategize. And it's a very, very advanced, complex brain that we have that allows us to have this perceptual experience of life that's not just animal survival, it's also thrival. It's not just survive, whereas the animals are survive. So animals, which I've observed in the wild a lot, when they're going about their day, they're hyper-vigilantly looking for food or trying to avoid being food. So they're either in the predator mode themselves, looking for prey, and if they see prey, their animal brain goes, good, good, go towards that. That's food. That's survival. Good, good. And then it sees a threat and it goes, whoa, bad. That's predator. Negative, negative. That's negative. And animals look through that lens of the good thing, food, procreation, bad, predator. Go away from that. And so similarly to how animals do that in the wild, when we're in the wild of our brain, our wild brain, our animal brain, we are doing that pros and cons list, that this is good for our survival. We want more of this, positive, positive, this is good. And then something that is a little bit of a threat, we're like, that's bad, it's bad. I had a good day today because things went the way that my brain says is going to be good for my survival. But I got fired today from my job. Oh, my animal brain's going, bad, 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 money. What if we're not going to die and not have money for food? And this is bad, this is bad. It's not objectively bad. It's neutral, and we just make meaning of it based on our algorithm. And so that's judging the situation. And you may well have heard this story that I'll tell now, but there's this Chinese story. Is it a Chinese proverb or a story? I can't remember what it's called, but it's a story. And what happens is there's this Chinese farmer and his horse runs away. And the neighbor sees what's happened and goes across and says, oh, that's really unlucky. And the Chinese farmer says, maybe. The next day, Chinese farmer wakes up and he sees that the horse that had run away has befriended a bunch of wild brumbies and brought back 10, 20 other horses. And then the neighbor sees what's happened and runs across and goes, oh, whoa, this is so lucky. Look at all these horses. And the Chinese farmer goes, well, maybe. Yeah. He's going, yeah, maybe it's good. Maybe it's bad. Maybe it's both. Who knows? I'm detached. But then the next door neighbor's the metaphor of the head looking for the good. Oh, this is good for your survival. Good, good, good. I'm only seeing the positive. I'm in subjective bias and my mind's in that animal brain where it's disconnected from that awareness, that objective love, perspective of love where you can see things through both those lenses. The Chinese farmer's like more in a state of equanimity, maybe. And so all those horses are there. And then he says, maybe. Next day, farmer gets up and his son tries riding and breaking in one of the horses, the wild horses. And the wild horse bucks him off and he falls on the ground and breaks his leg. And then the neighbor runs across and says, oh my gosh, how unlucky is this? And the Chinese farmer says, maybe. Then the next day, or let's say a few weeks later, there is some civil war breaking out and the government or the local authorities are gathering, conscripting young men to join their army to fight in this battle. And they come across to the Chinese farmer's property and say, hey, where's your son? We want to recruit him as a soldier and we want him to go fight this war. And he says, well, my son's got a broken leg. And they say, oh, well, that's no good. We'll leave him here. And then the neighbor runs across and says, what happened? He says, oh my gosh, they didn't conscript him because of the broken leg. How lucky. And then the Chinese farmer says, maybe. And so that story is a beautiful example of what it can look like to be viewing life through the heart, seeing the positive and the negative, not being wildly flung by attachments. Yes, good for survival. And aversions. Oh, no, bad. That's bad. That's unlucky. No. That's the erraticness of being in the head, being in a state of fear constantly. And so that animal brain, again, if you observe animals in nature, they're hypervigilant. They're looking around and they're desperately trying to stay alive and desperately trying not to become prey of another predator. And they're desperately looking for food all the time to stay alive as well. And that animal brain is hypervigilant. It's dysregulated. The amygdala is online. And so the Chinese farmer's neighbor that says, oh, you're really lucky there, that's good. That's still a judgment. If someone comes home and they're in a good mood because the boss gave them a promotion and they get the champagne out and they come home and they're all celebrating. Also, the boss is like, you're going to get a promotion soon. Guy comes home and he's like, yes, positive, this is good. My algorithm from all the positive and negative memories that I have put into one unique script, one formula, is telling me, oh, this is good. Everyone's going to like me. This is going to be good for my survival. My status is going up. I can buy that car I've wanted to buy. Get the champers out, celebrate, tell all his friends about it. And he's in his ego. He's in his head. He's in fear thinking, I'm not enough right now. And so I've got some temporary reprieve from the idea that this potential promotion is going to be good for my survival. So I'm now feeling a inflated state. I'm not connected to love because I'm misperceiving the situation. I'm subjectively viewing it with pressure, from ignorance that this is good. And so that person's celebrating, and then a week later, someone else gets the promotion. And then that person, instead of being in this state that was all positive and happy, they're angry, they're devastated, resentful, frustrated, bitter about it. Bickering about it when he gets home to talk to his partner, and there's a lot of frustration and animosity and all this negative energy in the house. Why? Because he was thinking, well, I'm not enough. I've got lack in how I perceive myself, but my life's going to be better if I get this promotion. So I feel really good now. But then it gets taken away and he feels really bad. And that positive, negative pendulum swinging between good and bad is it's really the predicament of being in our head, being in fear consciousness. But a lot of the time, people are viewing spirituality as an access point to less negative and more positive. And that's not what it delivers. That's not what spirituality offers. Spirituality, when being embodied, offers a perspective of love, unconditional love, which is seeing things with full awareness, not half seeing it, not I like this, but I don't like this, but I see it all and I accept it all and I love and embrace it all as a part of God's creations. And so the opportunity here is understanding that judgment just merely doesn't happen when someone's in a state of enlightenment. All the ascended masters and spiritual leaders and people that as a society that, or anyone in the world that has some kind of affinity towards spirituality, there is always examples of what this looks like. Let's use the Bible. Let's use Jesus and the crucifixion. So Jesus is about to be crucified and his disciples are angry about what's happening and trying to kind of fight for him as he's on the way to be crucified and while he's being crucified. And what does Jesus say? In that moment, when there is evil at work. So evil at work, maybe people in church listening to the sermon about this are like, the people that crucified him are evil. But what Jesus says is, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Forgive them. So even though it could be easy to judge them, because they're bad, they're doing something that's evil, but Jesus isn't judging them. And he's the one that's being crucified. He's not judging them. He's not seeing them as bad. He's not seeing them as a villain. He's seeing them through the lens of compassion. And that's how you kill the devil, as I'm going to continue to give more depth and explanation of during this episode. So that's an example. We could easily look at that and go, that's bad. And when we are going through life in society, even in church groups or religious contexts, there is constant judgment happening because of the state of consciousness of those that are participating. It's not like someone who's a Christian or a Muslim or a Hindu or a Buddhist or a Mayan are objectively better or they all view life the same way. They're all human beings with a certain state of consciousness. And if their consciousness state is less evolved, they're going to be in their head more, in their survival brain, which doesn't mean that they are constantly shaking in their boots and terrified that they're going to die. It just means that they're in that state of consciousness that is influenced by survival. And they're therefore viewing the world through judgment. So if someone's praying and they're like, please God, give me that promotion. Please God, give me that promotion. That's not holy in nature. That's not looking at things through the eyes of love, because it's that person is in a state of consciousness where they're afraid. I'm not as good in my life with this job. Without the job, I'm not as good. And so please, 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 I'm really attached. I need the job. I'm not enough without it. I'm going to be better with it. That is a spiritually immature view. Not bad, just immature. Because the perception there, the presupposition is, God, please help me get my attachment because I'm scared. I'm going to pray to you. I'm going to pray to you. I'm going to do my, in Hinduism what's called tapas, which is I'm going to sacrifice something, withhold something. Or during Lent in the lead up to Easter in Catholicism and Christianity, I'm going to fast and I'm going to give money to the poor so you can give me a promotion at work, or, help me with abundance in the new year, or help my daughter finally find a man because right now she doesn't have a man and I'm worried about her. I'm stressed. I'm scared. If these powerful practices are done from a place of fear, they're going to manifest in the predicament or the phenomena of attachment. And so that is coming from the lens of the head that is scared, and therefore it's leveraging and perceiving life through that lens of the positive and negative scripts of good and bad. Whereas Jesus, in his moment of justifiable terror, actually rises above it to show us what unconditional love looks like. Forgive them, for they know not what they do. So that is the demonstration of spiritual embodiment. That is holding compassion. He's got compassion for them. If they're harming me, it's because they've got residual pain and suffering and stress in their system that's being projected onto me in the form of this act of violence and execution. But forgive them, they know not what they do. That is an example of viewing life through the heart. Not judging, in other words. Not judging. So it's the ultimate view of what in Vedic wisdom and Sanskrit is called dharma. Dharma. Dharma means nobility. Dharma means service. And that there's the path of righteousness, the path of viewing things with compassion and love. And in the most famous Indian book of all time, and one of the just most famous books of all time, the Mahabharata, which contains within it the Bhagavad Gita. The Mahabharata is like a solid 200 plus chapters long. It's huge. I'm reading it at the moment. It's monstrous. And it has, I think, 12 of the chapters are the Bhagavad Gita, and that Bhagavad Gita is usually told, that story is told with narration and commentary by different spiritual leaders that interpret the messages, usually similarly, but with different flavors. And that's what people read. And that book's the only book that Gandhi took to prison, is the Bhagavad Gita. Now, Gandhi, one of our most famous spiritual leaders and, let's say, role models for society, that was able to end the civil war in India and also allow India to reclaim its freedom from the colonization from Britain, he did it non-violently. And the way he was able to do it non-violently was because he was influenced by this non-judgment that I'm speaking of, that Jesus showed, which is killing the devil with compassion. That compassion means that there isn't judgment. Yeah, there's understanding. And so Gandhi was influenced by the Bhagavad Gita. Now, in the Bhagavad Gita, the storyline is essentially, and it's not a spoiler alert, because for some reason throughout the Mahabharata and the Bhagavad Gita, they just reveal what happens regularly throughout it. So it's not like you wait to see what's going to go down. They say what's going to go down very early in the book, which is interesting. So anyway, spoiler but not spoiler. There's a great war that's taking place that is the manifestation of a lot of karmic consequences. And essentially there are two families within this, let's call it a kingdom, Hastampura, and the city of elephants. And within Hastampura, there are two sets of children. And one of the sets of children, there are 5 princes. And these princes are examples of Dharma. And then in the other set of princes that have a different father, they are, I think they're Kavas, or Karavas. These are examples of Adama. Dharma means nobility. Adharma means evil. And the 5 princes and the 5 noble princes and the 100 evil princes. The evil princes, just like every storyline in every medieval movie, there's the person that's next in line that makes the most sense to be king. And then there's the bitter, evilly depicted brother that feels unworthy and therefore is trying to, in a shadowy way, usually that person's depicted more pale and vampire-like, and that person feels resentful and hateful and tries to enforce himself as the king. And then there's the person that's more benevolent and whole and more of the golden child that makes more sense to make king because he's more secure in himself, and therefore that gets projected out into the way that he would treat the kingdom. But there's always like this tussle between good and bad. And in this book, the Bhagavad Gita, there's the 5 princes and the 100 princes, and the bitter 100 princes led by the evil, there's like one most evil brother whose name, the pronunciation, excuse my pronunciation, but Duryodhana, I believe his name is. And he's rising up against the Pandavas, which is the name of the Dharma-led princes, the noble princes. And it's essentially the noble princes, when they're connected to their truth and as they grow and mature, they don't want to kill the other 100 princes, but the other 100 princes want to kill the 5 noble princes and want to take power because they feel unworthy and they're connected to suffering and they're in their head consciousness, fear consciousness. So anyway, because the 100 exist and the 5 exist and the 5 are actually quite strong and resilient, they're not going anywhere, and they naturally find themselves back into alignment in power. And the 100 other princes, the evil princes, want to kill them and take what's theirs. And so this, over a couple of decades or more, this big fight that's mainly instigated by the Kauravas or the Kavas, the evil princes, ends up manifesting to being this massive war with millions of soldiers on both sides, warriors on both sides. And essentially one of the noble princes, Arjuna, who is the most powerful warrior in the world at the time, who was a bowman and an archer, he is in this place. And the actual king, Yudhishthira, who's his older brother, and him are both real strong examples of being connected to the heart, similar to what I was depicting Jesus as earlier. And they're in this situation where they have compassion and they don't want to kill their evil brothers, but the evil brothers desperately want to kill them and take the power because of their insecurity and their, therefore, attachment. They need to be in power because they feel so unworthy. However, there is this, this is the perfect story to tell for this podcast, because Arjuna ends up at one point throwing his bow on the ground. And then he goes back to his chariot. And this is before the war officially starts. Goes back to his chariot, and he's just in this massive internal dilemma, because he knows that the war is right there, and there's millions of people that are going to die if the war breaks out. And it's the karmic consequence of this inevitability not being dealt with sooner. and it's manifested in this huge war. And he's there and he's like, I don't want to hurt my brothers. I don't want to do that. And his older brother Yudhishthira, who's also led by Dharma, doesn't want to do it either. And they're in this conflict. And the charioteer, the whole Bhagavad Gita is essentially a conversation between Arjuna, the greatest archer and warrior in the world, who's the leader of the noble princes in this battle, and between Krishna, who's the incarnation of God. And there's a conversation between God and this warrior, what to do, how to navigate this. The point that I want to point out here is that Arjuna, who has had these, and up until this point in the story, through the Mahabharata, all the lead up to this point, Duryodhana and the rest of the evil princes have constantly tried to execute, murder, and do all these evil things, essentially, like all these boundary crossing acts of violence against the five noble princes. But still, at this point, Arjuna is not wanting to fight and cause harm to the brothers, to his brothers, to the evil princes. And so, in other words, he has compassion for them. He has compassion for them. So these are very important, two very important stories, because you have one from the most widely read book in the world, the Bible, and one from probably one of the most other widely read books, definitely top 5, the Mahabharata and the Bhagavad Gita, which is essentially the Indian Bible. And they're both depicting an example of what it looks like to be in the highest level of empowerment. Jesus, when he is being executed, he is able to request that people treat his executioners with compassion. And Arjuna and Yudhishthira, two of the noble princes, they're also wanting to treat their adversaries as with compassion and love and understanding. And that's dharma. That's dharma. That's nobility. That's seeing life through the eyes of love, seeing the world free of judgment. And the person that benefits from that, yes, there's the world that benefits from the impact of an act of gratitude and love. But ultimately, the person that benefits most is the one that's in that level of empowerment. AKA, from the moment that Jesus was going to be crucified and it was unstoppable, from that point to his death, the experience that he had was impacted. It was an experience that was filled personally for him in a state that was more manageable than being in a state of absolute hatred. That idea that whoever is holding on to the hate and the resentment is the one that's holding on to the poison. So Jesus was able to experience his last time on earth in a state of more love and wholeness. And because he was so connected to divinity anyway, he would live forever. Essentially, he's connected to timeless love. And whereas if in that place of suffering, there's that projected hate and that blame, because there's this internalization of fear that's manifesting in that way. I'm scared, I'm dysregulated, I'm in my survival brain, and blame, project, judge. And so the point where this story becomes relevant for you is that there's a lot of darkness in the world. There's a lot of acts that are negative things. If someone murders someone, there's murder that happens all around the world. There's terrorist acts all around the world. And Dharma is being able to act from a noble place, being able to act from a place of love, act from the heart. And a really important point to address or consider here is that Dharma doesn't necessarily mean not holding someone accountable. And this is where Arjuna was given advice from Krishna that supported the situation, which was, you must do this. You must act from dharma, and dharma in this situation, nobility in this situation, the heart's aligned step that's needed is to do the war, aka accountability is needed. So dharma and looking through the heart doesn't mean bypassing responsibility. And I'm going to share an example of what this could look like from someone that I know that's gone through serious abuse, where they had a break and enter happen and someone tried to kill this person. And this person pressed charges to the person that tried to kill them, hold them responsible, held them accountable, but looked them in the eyes and forgave them. And in other words, didn't look down upon them at all. Didn't judge them. You're bad. You did that. You're bad. That person, like Joe Dispenza says, being in survival brain, in animal brains, it's not a place for change. It's not a place for love. You could only forgive someone if what's going on internally is a sense of wholeness. If that person's still terrified and scared, and I can't believe this person did, I can't even look at them, this person's despicable, and they're talking to their family, and all their family just projecting hate. We hate this person. They're picketing out the front of the courthouse, and they're just execute, kill this person, kill this person. They're all suffering. But in this case, the example that I'm giving, this person that had someone try to murder them with a knife in their house, this is someone that I know, that looks this person in the eyes and says, I forgive you. I really hope that you can recover and get through this. Just know that you have my forgiveness. But I'm still going to do my testimony, and I'm still going to press charges, and you will deal with the consequences for what you did. I'm not freeing you of responsibility, but I'm not looking down at you either. I don't think I'm above you. And in other words, I'm not judging you. Yeah. So this is where the opportunity for practical enlightenment applies, or a really noble approach to life that only has benefit for you. I remember there was one point I was working with my spiritual teacher, my meditation teacher, years and years ago, maybe 6 years ago. And I had a falling out with my sister, and my teacher was like, have you thought about getting in touch with your sister? And I was like, I don't want to do that to her. I'm sick of giving to her. And I'm always the one that's doing this. And I was in this real bitter, judgmental, she's the bad one, I'm the hero, she's the villain, I'm the victim in this situation, and she's the perpetrator. And my meditation teacher said quite directly, with a lot of wisdom, I'm not saying to do it for her. I'm saying to do it for you. Right now you're in your high horse, and it's quite arrogant to assume that you going and speaking to her, you're some savior, and it's all doing it for her. I'm saying, I'm coaching you right now. I'm saying if you go and can forgive her, you're the one that benefits, because you're not holding on to that perceived judgment. You're not better than her. Yeah, and it's arrogant to think that I'm so high and mighty, I will do this for this person's benefit. No, the person that benefited on the cross was Jesus. And the person that was able to have it in their heart, whether chicken or the egg, was definitely the fact that he was embodied in love, enough open-heartedness to be connected to Dharma, to be able to have that compassion and that compassion for his brothers, that he doesn't want to kill his brothers. And that therefore allowed him to have that dharma, but then making that dharmic decision to not judge them, even though he still needs to, thanks to the advice from God, from Krishna, he was able to hold that person accountable and responsible, but doing it with love and compassion meant that he had a clear conscience. He didn't experience as much hate and frustration. And so I'm going to speak to what's the relevance of this in the world? What's the relevance for you? Well, we have a lot of different examples of the way that society judges. There's a very suppressed and very shadowy society and collective behavior situation where there's a lot of presenting in a certain way and trying to seem good. And this happens in a lot of spiritual organizations where it's kind of like a spiritual ego. I'm superior because I've done this spiritual stuff, and people that aren't into this. So if someone that's into spirituality is like, oh, it's so good that you're doing this spirituality. This happened to me. And I didn't appreciate it, really. I was in business, very ignorant, very driven by money and significance. And because I was deeply scared and doing my best, really, with what the awareness that I had, doing my best, but nevertheless, very driven by fear, very driven by insecurity and growing very fast. And therefore, because I was insecure and I was dysregulated and I was in my head, I was in fear consciousness. I was in my sympathetic nervous system and wasn't present. I was living based on pressure. And so because that was my reality, I was always judging people that are more successful, good. I'd catch up with other people and I wasn't genuinely curious what they were up to. I didn't have the capacity for presence. I would just be judging everyone. How successful is this person? Am I better than them or worse than them? Wonder what's going on here. And then other people, over time, as I started to connect to spirituality more and become more spiritually inclined and more aware and therefore have greater capacity for presence, people would come up to me and say, it's so amazing how you've transformed, and far out, you're so different. And what they're implying there is, I didn't like the version of you before, but I like this version. And they're trying to give me a compliment, but indirectly, they're judging the version of me that literally just knew not what I did. Just like the executioner of Jesus. Forgive him, forgive them, for they know not what they do. They're not in their clear conscience, in complete open-heartedness and awareness, choosing to inflict pain. They're ignorantly in survival, and their whole life of trauma and pain has led them to a point where they're acting in this way. And so forgive them, for they know not what they do. And so for people to be like, oh my gosh, you're so much, without saying this directly, you're so much better now than you used to be. That's still a judgment. That's not loving. And so for a while that I used to be like, oh yeah, thank you. I have grown a lot. I am better now. And I was judging myself as well, which is why I manifested people that would view me that way and make those comments. Because I also thought, okay, cool. I was doing really well when I was successful. Yeah, it's good. I'm doing good. And then, oh my gosh, I just found out that I'm trying to prove myself and this is coming from fear. That's bad. And now I'm into spirituality. That's good. So I was better when I was doing that. Then I was worse. Now I'm into spirituality. I'm better. But if I dropped off on the spirituality, I'm worse. And it's all conditional love. It's all based on that survival script, that formula, that algorithm, good, bad, right, wrong. You do this is good for your survival. You do this is bad for your survival. And I'm walking around just trying to be loved for who I am, like desperately not trying to be loved for who I am. I'm just trying to prove that I'm worthy of love conditionally. Yeah. So I ultimately can look back at that behavior and realize that if I had awareness, I wouldn't have been behaving like that. And the moment that I did have awareness that I was behaving like that, and I digested it, I shut the business down. Because I'm a conscious person that's doing the best I can with the resources I have, just like everyone else. And so, because there's such a strong amount of judgment, there's such a high percentage of people that are living in dysregulation and fear in the world, that there's a lot of judgment. And there's this political correctness and this culture that's quick to judge, and not even just judge, but then project that judgment with shaming, public shaming. If someone finds out that there's been like a domestic violence case or a child abuse case, everyone instantly goes, that is disgusting. That is despicable. And don't have the capacity to access awareness of why would that person do that? And I'm not saying they should be bypassed of responsibility and they don't need to be held accountable. But just the way that they're viewed is very ignorant, very ignorantly judged, which is, it's not nice for the person, but it's also not a nice experience for the person that's judging, because again, they're holding on to that venom. And therefore, their experience is dysregulation. They're in survival brain. They're hypervigilant. They're connected to their fear consciousness. And that's not a nice experience. They're not present. They're feeling pressure inside. Pressure of this person's bad. Blame, blame. Still pressure. It's not a nice experience. It's much nicer to be able to hold awareness of the situation, have enough conscious awareness to be able to make a dharmic decision, just like Jesus could in the way that he was choosing to view his executioners, or the way that Arjuna was in the battlefield, being able to act with dharma, have open and the prefrontal cortex online because he's in his heart, and therefore really discern what's needed in this situation and act with utmost responsibility, but then also simultaneously hold love and equanimity in their heart that includes compassion for people that are trying to kill him and want him dead. It's a high level of spiritual responsibility and emotional responsibility. So let's just pause, take a breath for my sake, because I need a breath. So if we look at the world right now, the next piece that I want to talk about in what I feel is a really, really important episode right now. This is something that gives you and I the opportunity to live with a deep sense of empowerment and a deep perspective of love and compassion for ourselves and others. I feel so much more compassionate towards myself now, whereas I used to judge myself so hard for everything. Judge myself really well if I did something that I thought was good for my survival. I achieved. Look at me, I achieved. I did so good. And then if I don't achieve as much the next day, bad Dobby. And that's really sad. I've got a lot more love and compassion because I'm a bit more connected to my heart now that I've been meditating for a longer period of time. So I get to enjoy the benefit of seeing the world with a bit more awareness, with a bit more unconditional love, and myself. So when someone is a child molester in society and there's hate coming from people towards them, there's a difference between, again, accountability and forgiveness. There can be forgiveness and compassion, just like the example that I gave of the person that I know who's a beautiful, empowering, heart-centered person that was a survivor of a intense murder attempt at knife point by an intruder into their home. And they're able to look this person in the eyes and say, I love you. Wow. And I forgive you. Wow. That is just showing the state of consciousness that person's living in, just like Jesus, just like Arjuna. Yeah. So if we look at some cultural and collective judgments, if there's someone that's in a church and the collective perspective in the church is that someone that has a sexual preference that involves same-sex sexuality, and they're being judged by the community. The community aren't viewing the world as Jesus viewed the world. I've done a lot of research into this recently, early in my research journey and early in my studies, but I understand that Christianity was formed after Jesus died. He didn't determine all the rules of the church. He was who he was as a very embodied and enlightened master of his awareness and understood the way that the world worked. And his consciousness state was very evolved. It would have to be wanting to help people so much and be this healer, but then also simultaneously on his deathbed, essentially being able to forgive his executioners. So if there's a church group that's being very judgmental of someone's sexual preferences just based on some scripture that they read in the Bible that wasn't even written by Jesus, they are not connected to the state of consciousness that Jesus was promoting. Yeah. They're in a judgment. So the devil, this is the devil's work. This is the devil's work. Homosexuality is the devil's work. Well, Jesus was saying that we want to have compassion for the devil, for anything that's perceived as negative in society, understanding that it's only ever done from ignorance. It's only ever done from ignorance. It's not that we don't hold them accountable. And like in Arjuna's case, he had to win that war. And those people were unrelenting in their pain and then inflicting pain on others. Hold them accountable. But if you can view them through the eyes of compassion, you free yourself from that hate. And so that's how you kill the devil, because the devil is merely a tempter of our own internal fear consciousness. The devil is merely creating opportunities for us to learn unconditional love. It's controversial. If I went into a church, into certain churches around the world, I know that a lot of people would be triggered by this. The devil is an opportunity for enlightenment. The devil is an opportunity to learn to love. Because was the devil in the executioners of the crucifiers of Jesus Christ? They would say that, right? But what did Jesus say to do with the devil? To kill the devil? No, to forgive the devil. Forgive him. Forgive it. Forgive them, for they know not what they've done. They don't have bad intent, right? And so, pausing for a second here, if we look at the way that trauma works, we only act as humans in ways that cause other people pain. We only do that when we are in fear consciousness, when we're scared. I can be manipulative in my relationship. I don't do it when my heart's open. I do it when I'm feeling defensive. I'm never in an argument with an open heart. I'm only in an argument when I'm feeling defensive and I need to prove that I'm right and I'm scared that you're not going to love me, so I'm defending myself. Then I get into the argument and I'm not even aware. I'm in complete head hypnosis. Why are you arguing with your partner? Well, I've lost track of time. I don't even know what I'm arguing about. I'm in a trance. I'm in a head hypnosis. I'm in fear consciousness because I've got that fight or flight response of the head, which is very hypnotic, the hypnotic prison of the mind, or what I call head hypnosis. I'm in head hypnosis. I don't want to be yelling at my partner. Not that I'm exaggerating here. We're not often yelling, but there is disagreements where we're kind of both frustrated and projecting, and I'm trying to be manipulative and I might be judging Shana. I'm never consciously doing that. I'm only doing it in the moments where my trauma is being triggered. And it doesn't mean that I don't need to take responsibility for that and apologize, but I can apologize, hold myself accountable, and hold myself with compassion. And so if we look at acts that could only be seen or done by the devil's work, we escalate. Because me being manipulative, that's me being malevolent. That's me being evil, adama, in that moment. I am trying to use my intelligence in those moments moments unconsciously to make Shana feel like she's done something wrong, to deflect away from my own insecurities. I'm trying to hurt her mentally or emotionally in those moments where I'm defending myself, to deflect unconsciously. Why would anyone consciously do that? But that's what's happening. So I'm trying to inflict pain. And that's because it's coming from a lot of pain. The quote that's relevant is, hurt people, hurt people. Hurt people, hurt people. People that have pain in them project that pain onto others. Now, I had a certain amount of pain in my life, and I've inflicted a certain amount of pain in my life, unconsciously, from survival. I've copped karmic consequences of that by suffering in my own world and being in toxic relationships and contributing to toxic dynamics and all of that. And I've had to deal with the responsibility and the accountability of therefore not having a rewarding relationship. And I'm lucky that I haven't had enough pain in my life to inflict serious pain where I have done something like sexually abuse someone or murder someone. But when I was in my teenage years and I was experiencing extreme mental and emotional abuse from my father, I would walk around the school grounds just with murder on my mind. Not actual, like I'm thinking of stabbing people, but just clenched fists, angry. Like, go on, say something to me. I want to take this out on something or someone. Now, I'm not a bad man. I'm not a satanic person. I'm not some evil person. But my gosh, I had a lot of hurt in me and I was damn angry. And I wanted to project and channel that. And I was just a ticking time bomb. I'm lucky that I didn't do something stupid at a party once and just get in a punch on with someone and seriously injure them or be seriously injured myself. But does that make me evil? That I was clenching my fist with hate in my mind? Well, it was because my dad was hating on me and projecting all his pain onto me. I know that there is a history of sexual abuse in my family lineage. And my dad is like everyone on the planet, is a kind-hearted person. He's got a pure heart and a beautiful nature. But the nurture, the trauma, the patterns aren't really as easy to love because there's evil tendencies in there. Manipulation, abuse, gaslighting, just projection. It was a living hell for me in those years, not understanding what was going on when I lived with my dad after my mum left. So is he evil? No. He's gone through a lot of abuse in his life, but not as much abuse as some other people. Now, what I want to describe next, which is really important, is that if someone grows up and is treated in a way that is neglectful from their parents and their care providers, they can cultivate what's called toxic shame. So if there's a kid that smacks their sister in the face and the parents are like, whoa, that's not okay, bad, that's not okay. And there's other people looking around and the kid's all embarrassed and covers his face and runs off crying. Like, oh, what did I do? What the heck? Because he just got in the heat of the moment, smacked his sister in the face. Now, it's healthy to shame that kid so he can learn what is acceptable, what isn't acceptable. Hold the kid accountable. But that's healthy shame. Toxic shame is if that kid was neglected or abused. And neglect can mean not in minimizing a kid's emotions or not being there enough. Working all the time can be neglectful for the kid's emotional development and feeling of safety. Because remember, as kids growing up, we're dependent on our parents for survival, and we're scared creatures. We have fear. We have that animal brain. And if a kid grows up deciding that the circumstance he's in means that maybe he internalizes or she internalizes some of it, If there's a kid and there's such a high percentage of the population that have experienced sexual abuse as kids, if that happens to someone, then that person is going to most likely develop toxic shame. And toxic shame essentially means that that person is walking around thinking that they are inherently defective or flawed. There's something wrong with me. That's the only way that this idea of parents get divorced and the kids think it's their fault. Why would a kid think it's their fault? It makes no sense, but that's what kids do. They internalize it, because to consider that the parent is the problem is not a reality that a child who's dependent upon his parents for survival can accept. Kids have to see their parents as adequate to be able to trust them and stay with them so they can protect them. They need their parents. So kids' minds are programmed to internalize problems. It's kind of doesn't seem like the most effective programming, but it's just the way that it works. And so if a kid's neglected and they develop toxic shame, they're walking around feeling like, I'm inherently defective and flawed. I'm not lovable for who I am. And because I need other people I need to belong. I need other people to love me. I need to fit in and be worthy. Because as humans, we depend on other people for survival. That person's in toxic shame. They're walking around feeling unsafe as who they are. Just constantly walking around going, I'm less than human. I'm not safe. And there's this thin film of stress and dysregulation going, I'm unsafe. I need to prove myself. I need to please. I need to achieve. I need to do whatever I have to do to try to compensate for feeling defective and flawed and inherently less than human. I've got to compensate and try to be more than human, superhuman. And if they can't meet up to that impossible task of escalating ways to try to be more than human, the only other real escape that people can have from their trauma and the pain that still sits cathartically in their system as a imprint, a samskara, a scar, a trauma, a wound, an exiled part. The other way that someone can find reprieve from that is to become the abuser. If they're the victim, if they can become the perpetrator, in those moments of perpetration, the feeling of being less than and unsafe is risen above by flipping the script of being the victim, and they become the perpetrator. They go from being, I'm unsafe to unsafe to no one's going to make me unsafe. I'm doing it to you. And this is all unconsciously done. But why on earth? Because it's just what happens. I've seen it time and time again. I've done enough healing, enough workshops, enough facilitation, enough coaching to have worked with and seen hundreds of people that have had sexual abuse as kids. That many of them, the sexual abuse they had as kids were done by people that were sexually abused when they were kids, which were done with people by sexually abused by they were kids when they were kids. And the people that I've worked with sometimes have done sexual abuse. And just think about this. If someone has been sexually abused and it was the bane of it was the terror of their life, it was the trauma and the most painful experience of their life, why on earth would they just do the same thing to someone else consciously? Can you fathom that if you just put yourself in their shoes? Let's say, for example, someone just teased you, and you tease someone else. If you know how it feels, it makes no sense to do it to someone else. But it's an unconscious way that trauma is inherited and passed down through a lineage and through generations until the person can sit with that pain. Come on. My heart's prayer alarm just went off. And so just take that on board for a second. So what the message that I really want to strongly push right now, which is, again, it takes a lot of maturity to take this on board, but if someone in the world is doing horrific things to other people, what's going on in their internal reality? What's going on in their internal reality? And as a society, because society is so socially and bound in some weird way now because it's so globalized and interconnected, whereas back in the day, there's 20 to 50 people in a tribe. I mean, there's not too much to worry about there. But there's not... The social dynamics can be more easily managed. But when the social dynamics are happening through social media, and there's millions of people on there, there's this weird, unique situation where image is more manufactured than ever before. Because we're just seeing little mini screen grabs of people's character. And then we make judgments and assumptions about people. It's a really interesting collective situation. Whereas in a tribe, what we know of people is what we know of by spending every day with them in our whole life, because we live in the same tribe. So we know what people are like, and we establish a sense of self based on, I know what people are like. We have this interesting dynamic where it's so easy for people to feel scared of judgment and just cast massive judgment. I'm scared of being judged, and I cast massive judgment. So if someone comes out in the Me Too movement, or someone is not respond in some way around Black Lives Matter and have an opinion, which everyone's entitled to have in my viewpoint, from my viewpoint, and then they just get destroyed in all this projected hate and frustration. It's a very interesting situation. Now, the invitation here is to understand that if someone hurts someone else, in the world, they're hurt. They're hurt. And it is, if there's an animal in the wild that kills another animal, it needs to do it for survival. There's someone else in a war that's killing other people, they're damn scared. No one hurts unless they're scared. If there's a terrorist that's doing despicable acts of unthinkable violence and malevolence, then it can only be done from inherited pain or manufactured pain. If I put myself in a situation where I had 5 people or 30 people that are closest to me murdered by a certain group of people, I can imagine myself wanting to kill them and just having hate in my body, fear, hate, anger from that pain. Yeah. But then it'd be easy for me from the outside, just being a bit naive and not putting myself in the shoes and seeing someone else hate other people and want to hurt them, to go, shame, shame, how terrible, evil terrorists, evil. And what I want to invite us all to in this is a level of responsibility that says, I'm going to take on the inspiration from ascended masters, people like Jesus Christ, people like Arjuna, and other legit real life and other mythical examples of looking through the eyes of the heart that sees things with compassion, because we understand that if anybody's doing an act, just like my friend that forgave her abuser or attempted murderer, perpetrator, that can only happen through the eyes of love. And accountability and compassion are 2 separate things. And so if compassion can be showed to someone that's done unthinkable things, what's the effect that has on them? If you're in an argument and you say a bunch of mean stuff, and the person you said a bunch of mean stuff cries and looks you in the eyes and say, it's not okay for you to do that, but I understand you're in pain and I forgive you, what sort of effect can that have on you? What impact does that have on the human spirit? The answer is it cuts straight through to our heart. It penetrates through the fear, the protection, the shields, the protective strategies, the survival brain, and it penetrates straight in the heart. Just like vulnerability has the ability to cut through anything, deep vulnerability. There's a big argument, and then one of the two people break into tears, break down. It completely diffuses the situation, or at least dramatically shifts the energy. If they're in their deep vulnerability and they're like, I'm sorry, and they start crying. And so compassion kills the devil. And the devil that it kills is not just necessarily killing. It's not just supporting the person that perpetrates. But most importantly, because I'm talking to you right now, it's empowering for you. Because we all have an angel and a devil within. We all have good and bad qualities within. We all have dharma and adharma. We all have a fear consciousness and a heart. Both exist. And if judgment gets projected out there to other people, and looking through the eyes of they're bad, they're wrong, they shouldn't have done this, and we're shaming people, it means that we're walking around shaming ourselves. Because if you put yourself in the exact same upbringing as that person, you're probably going to do the exact same thing. And it is damn immature and it's just immature not to see that. And it lacks a lot of love and compassion. So the invitation here is, can you see people through the lens of compassion? Can we understand that we view the world, if we view the world through love, we can still hold people accountable, but we can free ourselves from this shame-blame game, this judgment paradigm of even good or bad, and just see them through the eyes of unconditional love. Jesus, whether you're Christian or not, I don't identify as a Christian at all, but my gosh, I take a lot of inspiration from that. I don't see myself as a Hindu either. I take a lot of inspiration from the story of Arjuna and Yudhishthira and the other three princes and their capacity to hold love and forgiveness and compassion in a situation that would be very triggering towards people that are trying to kill them. So, the last piece that I'll say here is we can attempt to do this reactively. You listen to what I just said and it gives you a perspective that will inform some awareness potentially in moments when maybe in the past you would have judged, and now you've got new awareness that you can call upon in those situations, maybe to then have a bit more compassion, potentially. But what's definite is that if you can actually cultivate more love in your life in general and feel more whole in who you are and be more connected to your heart proactively, then situations, whether you're thinking about compassion or not, the compassion naturally arises within your consciousness. You can just proactively have more wholeness within, and therefore there's less judgment projected. And the most potent way to access that wholeness is through meditating and connecting to pure wholeness with a transcendence meditation technique. I will be coming back from India at the end of August and running meditation courses. And so I would love to teach you to meditate. And if you don't want to meditate and learn Vedic meditation through me, learn Vedic meditation through somebody else, because there's nothing else that is as potent of an access point to the spiritual heart, to cultivating a sense of internal wholeness as that. And once that's created, there's going to automatically be less judgment, more compassion that you foster in the way that you relate to the world. So we've got this. We've got this. We can do this together, one trigger at a time, one judgment at a time, correct ourselves and take responsibility for our own projections, and therefore see the world through the lens of love, which means we get to experience the most fulfilling life. We get to be in the highest level of empowerment, and we get to have a cascading impact of service that comes and trails from that. Woo. Yeah, let's do it. So that's the end of this episode. Please leave a review on this podcast if you haven't already. I love you guys to bits, and I'll see you all soon in the next one. Peace out.